Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another broadcast of The Reset. I am your host, Mr. Andre Clay. And today we have a really good show for you. Today's show is Race and Reaction, White America's Involvement in the Protest for George Floyd. Today's show is a call-in show. Last 15 to 20 minutes of the show, please call in. It's 708-414-0849. That again is 708-414-0849. Today's show has been highly anticipated for the last week. I've noticed on Facebook. I have gone through my messengers and a lot of optimistic views about today's show I've been receiving. I brought with me today three guests of mine, um, three very good friends of mine. Mr. Greg McAleer has been on the show before. We also have Miss Debbie Dodge Bodie, and also Miss Mona Weber Armstrong. And together, they are representative of our allies in this fight against injustice, police brutality, um, and I'm very eager to hear their points of views today. Again, today's call-in show is 708-414-0849. Now, before we get started, one of the reasons, one of the biggest reasons, I'd say motivated me to do this show was we anticipated the protest that was going to take place after the death of George Floyd. After his murder, um, in my mind, as a Black American, fully supportive of the protest against police brutality and police accountability. The thing about it is, I didn't feel optimistic about it. I didn't feel hopeful about it because in the past we have seen protests end up not meaning much legislatively, not really bringing about any real change to this. Um, until that morning, I woke up and saw the first day of protest, and I saw something I never saw before. I saw people of all races protesting. I've
Yeah,
always usually seen a predominantly Black protest. And along with that, all of the usual criticisms of the protest that I've always, heard. But this protest was different. I saw tons of young people, young white kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids. Not a lot of Asian kids, but I was so happy to see that, and I thought to myself, "Wow, that's different. I never saw that before." And as as the protest grew, I saw more and more people of all different races and cultures get involved and participate. I saw it spread from state to state. We've seen it spread worldwide. And so I'm like, I want to know why. What motivated other cultures to decide with this protest, with this particular protest? What was it? What was it that motivated you to get more involved? I have to say I'm very proud of that. I have to say that. And it is something that I would like to see more of because that is what America is really supposed to be about. So, with that being said, today I have with you three of my guests. Each one will be introducing themselves to you. And before we get started with that, I do have a quick article. You guys know me; I like to read a little something. So let me go to my screen share here. Can you guys see that? All right. This article that I'm about to go into is called 74% of Americans view George Floyd's death as an underlying racial injustice problem. Nearly three, went too far. Nearly three-fourths of Americans view the death of George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer as a sign of underlying racial injustice problem, a new ABC News poll finds. A significant shift from a similar question asked about 6 years ago. This poll shows a more than 30-point increase in the belief that recent events reflect a broader issue over racial injustice from a ABC News poll from December 2014, 4 months after the shooting of Michael Brown, an 18-year-old black man by a white cop, and 5 months after the death of Eric Garner, a black man who died after choke, being put in the chokehold by a white officer. In the 2014 poll, 43% of Americans said that those instances showed signs of a broader problem, while 51% called it an isolated incident. In the new poll, which is conducted by Ipsos in partnership with ABC News, using Ipsos's knowledge panel, only 26% believe the incident is an isolated one. And at a time of deep strife and unrest, there is a rare show of uniformity across race and party about the treatment of African Americans by the police. Majority of whites, 70%, blacks, 94%, Hispanics, 75%, Democrats, 92%, Republicans, 55%, and independents, 71%, agree that what happened to Floyd exemplifies a systemic rift between law enforcement and black communities in the country. Now, I won't go more into this, but the last of it says it hasn't always been that way. In that 2014 poll, 60% of whites thought the incident in Ferguson and New York were isolated, compared with 75% of blacks and 51% of Hispanics who believed it to be reflective of a broader problem. If you want to read more about this article, you can go to ABC News's website. It's written by Kendall Carson. Um, get out of here real quick. Go back to the show. With that being said, just wanted to kind of frame how things have been for those who are not aware. I couldn't see how you wouldn't be, but to start things off, I got a couple of questions. I want to know from each of my guests tonight, what motivated you to support this movement, and what do you see? Why do you see this change in support from white America? Why are we seeing this? And I think I'm going to start with Debbie. I'm going to start with Debbie. What motivated you to start supporting this movement? And
Um,
why do you see this change in support for from white America?
this isn't something new for me. Just with Mr. Floyd's death, this has been ongoing in my life for as long as I can remember. Equality for all is something that I hold very dear. We all are the same, and I have advocated for that for years. I mean, many people that know me know that. Um, what I think is different. So in that article, I know that I read it on Facebook with you. I follow you, you follow me. So I know that we shared that article between ourselves. 6 years ago, there was, if you look at the timeline, I don't know if anybody caught Spike Lee's and ESPN's show, and they did talk about Michael Brown. They talked about basically, they categorized over 6 years all these deaths that we've just watched and watched and watched. And I think you're seeing a 30% increase in these numbers for a couple of different reasons. The Gen Zs are starting to come into their own and say, hey, this isn't right. We're all the same. The other thing that I think that you're definitely seeing is people looking at this and no longer being able to turn a blind eye. We all watched that video. You have to be living under a rock if you haven't seen at least some clip of that almost 9 minutes of that officer on Floyd begging for his life, crying for his mother, literally decompensating in front of our eyes. There's no way that any decent human being can turn away and say he deserved that.
Right.
So I think that that has definitely highlighted for a lot of people that maybe this is enough. You know, when we start seeing people murdered, and that is the term that I'm going to use for it, by our police officers, and our children are watching, they're watching us and they want to know what we're going to do about it. Um, so, you know, maybe, and I don't advocate for anybody losing a life.
Right.
Um, you know, certainly. But his daughter has said it once and said it numerous times in all the clips that I've seen. I think she's 6, and she said, "Daddy's going to change the world," and maybe he will.
Yeah, yeah, I heard that. I feel you, Devin, and thank you for being such a strong ally. Yeah, you and I, we always chit chat on Facebook, and so I know exactly what's up with you, girl. I already know. I already know. I think you hit on a really important point about the younger generation. They they definitely they see it for what it is. And I love their courage. And so I think they're in desperate need of our guidance. But yeah, that they see it for what it is. And you're right. It was too obvious for people to just turn away and act like I didn't see that. Nah, that was 9 minutes. That man is gone. And yeah, it was tough to watch, too tough to watch. Greg, same thing, my man. What motivated you to support the movement for Black people's fight for justice, and why do you see this change in white America that we're all witnessing?
Well, I'm like Debbie. This is something that I've felt my whole life. This is the way I was raised. I mean, and I think that's what a lot of this all goes back to is the way you were raised. Were you raised with different minorities around you, or were you raised in a predominantly white or all white background or area?
Mhm.
Um, so I was raised with people of all backgrounds.
Mhm.
I was born and raised in the city, and you start to see people who for who they are,
Right.
not what color they are. I have friends that are black, who to me they're almost like family.
Mhm.
I don't see color. So, and as far as what's going on now, you know, I think for the first time, we've all got to witness a situation from start to finish. We've never seen that before. We see how fast a situation deteriorated when it didn't have to. And people are starting, if you notice now, especially throughout these protests, you know, police are starting to look more like military, and the military is
And
trying
act
to be
like
turned into the police.
right.
There's definitely something going on here, and everybody is saying it stinks, and we're not going to take it.
That's what's up, man. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. America is fed up. America is
Yeah,
definitely fed up, man. I'm seeing it, and you're right. The military, yeah, they have definitely become more militarized, and they have recently shown a willingness to use military force on civilians. Um, it's not pretty out there. I'm glad that the protests continue despite that threat. or what appears to be a threat. You know,
Right.
uh, I'm gonna be fair about things,
Uh,
but yeah, it's you're right about that. Mona, same thing to you. What motivated you to support the movement? Why do you think we're seeing this change from white America?
Okay, so I too, I mean, I always supported us. I have, I'm a hairdresser, so I talk to people all day long, and the majority of my clientele are probably white women. So I hear, I talk to them all day long. In my personal life, the majority of my friends are people of color, so I talk to them as well. And so that, so I think what now why people are actually stepping in from all ethnicities is that video. I mean, showed us that these police have no regard. I mean, that policeman had no regard for his life whatsoever. And to watch that video tells that, and you can't deny that there's a problem here. Like that should have never happened, and it happens all the time. And I'm going to tell you what people's argument is that more white people are killed by police than black people. If you look at the numbers, year after year, more white people are killed by police than black people. That's the argument.
Right.
But I think that people now are realizing the problem is the how and why. There's no reason for it.
Right.
I mean, people are finally realizing, like, I mean, this man lost his life and was brutally murdered because he had a fake $20 bill or whatever the hell. And I think that, I mean, if you go back to Trayvon Martin, a kid walking down the street, he looks suspicious. Like, for why? The why and the how, I think, is why people are still starting to come around and understand there's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. The why and the how, it cannot be ignored. It can't be ignored. Um, I think you're right about that. You know, that 30% of white Americans, according to that poll, um, who seem to not be so supportive. Um, we're seeing a lot of this online in different forms, right? I personally get chance to go back and forth with people about this issue, about certain aspects of the issue, and what I've seen a lot of is deflection in the way of bringing up his past, George Floyd. And this is actually commonplace with every murder of unarmed Black people
Right.
that I've seen. Um, Also, Mona brought up a good thing, something about how the numbers. And what I have always debated with people about is unless you are giving me context to the data, to the numbers that you are presenting me, those are just numbers and they don't mean anything. It's the context that gives it the definition that explains it. And so with that 30% not being so supportive and with the deflection that we see, the the insults that we've witnessed, um, why do you guys think we see this kind of resistance um, f- um, from some white Americans? Why do you think that? Where does that come from, and why do we see that? Um, Greg, let me ask you, why do you think that is? Where does that come from? Why are we seeing it?
Again, I mean, it's all about where you grew up. What did your parents teach you? You know, I there are people that I know that and some of them will brag about the fact that they're racists.
Hmm.
And I find it disgusting. But it's the fact that this was instilled in them from the very beginning, and their parents probably the same thing. This is something that goes down family lines for
Generational.
generations. Yeah, right. It's generational.
Yeah.
Um, and they just aren't going to give it up. It's these people, they're just like Trumpers. I mean, no matter what the guy does, it's fine. If anybody else had done it, it wouldn't be fine. But same thing. I mean, people look at black people and they're just, no matter who they are. We saw this with President Obama, probably the greatest president we've had in the between the 21st and 20th century, besides Kennedy and Roosevelt.
Yeah.
But because he was black, look at all the backlash he got.
Yeah.
This is something that's been instilled in them from a very young age, and they just aren't going to see it any differently. There's no changing their mind. I mean, you can tell just when you look at people's posts on Facebook, what are they referring this to? People that are like us are referring to this as protests. People on the other side are referring to it as riots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right, man. Mona, same thing. Why do you think we're seeing so much? We see some of the resistance and some of the deflection that we're seeing from some white Americans. Why is that?
Well, Greg is right. I mean, it goes back to how you were raised and what you learned, growing up, and you're instilled, certain views. But also, the media has a lot to do with it. The media has a lot to, because some people grown up in rural, country, you know, literally have never had a conversation with a black person.
Mm-hmm.
Like they literally have never sat down and had a conversation with anyone of color.
Right.
They know their community, which is a white community, and so therefore the only view they have of black people is from the media and what the media shows and what they see on Facebook, and it's often negative. And so that's then how they view people of color.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, of course, it has a lot to do with it. But when the only view they have is what they see on the news or social media, that's all they know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Black people not being able to control our own narratives, our own images. That you're absolutely right, because the same types of prejudices or a similar type of prejudice we also see from people who look just like us, who may come from different countries in Africa, from the Caribbean, and same thing. Their only images of black people here in America, African Americans, ADOS, are the images they see us in movies, on TV, in videos. And so they think, oh, okay, that's who they are. And they're just as ignorant as their images appear to be. And so when they actually come here, yes, there
Right,
is
right.
uh, an opinion of us that we're like, why do you think this way? But that's why. You're right about that, Mona. Deb, same thing. Why do you think we are seeing some of the resistance and deflection from some white Americans that we're seeing?
Well, I think that 30% number that the article alludes to, that does not support, probably directly correlates to Trumpers. And really, this guy has ripped off the Band-Aid on the underbelly of America, and these people just poured out. And I think that it's complex, because I mean, it's real easy to say somebody's racist, because I call them out all the time.
Yeah.
But I do. But I live in Sandwich, where, you guys live in, you live in Aurora, and Greg, I saw you came from, and heard that you came from Chicago. I went from the east side of Aurora to Earlville, which,
Yeah,
oof,
I've been there.
oof. And now I'm in Sandwich, and let me tell you, there is there are people that are sympathetic to this cause that are afraid of this 30%, and afraid, and they are worried about what happens to me if I come out and say, hey, look, I sympathize with this. And I know that you probably saw the post yesterday, Dre, and maybe even you, Mona, that I put up there that said, hey, look, if you feel hopeless or whatever, reach out to me, because we need to stand strong.
Yeah, I did.
There are 3 Trump flags on my street alone, and one next door to my home. If you don't think that I'm not hypersensitive about this racist underbelly in America, I can't convey it enough. And, something that Greg doesn't know, my significant other is Black. And so, there's the problem that you have with small town America is exactly what you both have said. And I'm going to echo it. There hasn't been exposure. What they see has been, again, something that's been a narrative that's been put out in the media, or conversely, sports idols. And, we want, everybody loves Mike, but Mike didn't say much. So it's that kind of thing that, there's actually not a lot of contact with individuals where you can just say, that's an individual. That person emotes just like I do. That person loves and hates and feels and whatever, they're human just like me. And that's the thing that we have to overcome. And then some of them MFers, you just not going to get with it. You know what I'm saying? You're just not going to change the heart of some people. Some people are just hateful human beings, and you're never going to change them. And so those are the people that we need to be aware of.
I feel you on that. For those friends of ours who are not that ignorant, but just don't know. Well, I guess ignorance is you just don't know. But I do just want to share with you something. Let me go here to my share screen again. I have an article that I wanted to read from that basically highlights a lot of the reasons why things go the way they go here. The name of the article: Black Americans 2.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by police. For those people that do the deflection, here's a little data. Here's a little information for you, some numbers, so that you can take this home with you. Protests around in the United States are boiling over after Minneapolis man George Floyd was killed by police. Floyd, accused of using a counterfeit 20, had his neck compressed by an officer's knee while in handcuffs for roughly 9 minutes before later dying. Other recent instances of racism against African Americans in this country have led to massive protests against police brutality and systematic institutional racism that many feel have gone unchecked for decades. In 2019, data of all police killings in the country compiled by Mapping Police Violence, Black Americans were nearly 3 times more likely to die from police than white Americans. Other statistics showed that Black Americans were nearly 1.5 times more likely to be unarmed before their death. Most states, police forces kill Black people at a higher rate per capita than white people, with Illinois, New York, and Washington, D.C. carrying some of the largest discrepancies by state. DC, with a Black population of nearly 50%, had 88% of all police killings be against Black Americans, a discrepancy of over 38% percentage points. Rhode Island had the largest discrepancy of 44 points, albeit with a much smaller sample size of 4 police killings in 2019, 2 of them being African American. While much of the Western states have smaller discrepancies overall than Eastern ones, large cities like Reno, Oklahoma City, and Anaheim all had higher police killing rates of Black people than the total U.S. murder rate. Others above the U.S. murder rate were St. Louis, Madison, Wisconsin, Scottsdale, Arizona, and two others. Overall, in 2019, 24% of all police killings were of Black Americans, when just 13% of the U.S. population is Black, an 11-point discrepancy. Mapping police violence has also shown that 99% of all officers involved in all police killings had no criminal charges pressed against them. For anyone like to read the rest of this article, again, it is on the Statista website. This website I sometimes use for the stats that I gather. Really good with their findings, the research that they do. The name of the article: Black Americans 2.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by police, by Wilhelm Roper. June 2nd, 2020, this article was from. Let me go back to stop sharing, go back to the show. And next question I wanted to ask is, why do you believe that 99% of all officers included in all police killings had no criminal charges pressed against them? Mona, I want to ask you that. Why do you believe that all these officers, no charges pressed?
So that's a really good question. And I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, the only thing that I can, the only logical answer I can come up with is that if they feel, and they, I mean the powers that be, the sergeants and lieutenants or whatever, but I just feel like maybe they feel like if they start charging police officers with murders when it is actually a murder, I mean, sometimes it could be justified. I mean, if somebody obviously has a weapon and is ready to start shooting and it's your life or his, I feel like that's the only time that murder could be justified.
These are
But
unarmed.
I feel like maybe think that if they unarmed, okay. So maybe they feel like if they start charging these officers with murder, maybe they feel like that the people will look at them like they don't have any authority. Like maybe they think that people will start thinking, well, you know, we're going to charge these officers. I don't know these officers not be charged because obviously if you are shooting an unarmed person, that's murder. There's no reason for it. There's no reason for it. I mean, I feel like there's other ways to subdue someone that doesn't have a gun, or I mean, there's no reason for it. They should definitely be charged. I can't use with an answer.
Andre, you know what? I can tell you why.
Go ahead. I was just getting ready to come to you.
You know why?
What's up?
It's the police unions. It's the police unions and the
I don't know why.
It's the strangleholds that they have on the city's governments and the attorney general's offices.
Okay.
You know, and I'm a member of two different unions, but I can see, you know, I have friends that are in government in Chicago, and most of the financial problems that Chicago has is because of the police unions and pensions and how much money is spent. And that's why it's the unions that have these contracts that these guys are virtually untouchable no matter what they do.
Wow. Yeah. You know, I've heard that conversation. I heard that conversation a lot. I personally
Well, that
think
makes sense.
that's the same thing. I believe the same thing. I do. I do. Yeah. But what about you? What do you think it is?
So I think that this is, again, this is not a one-stop shop. We have complex we have issues with complexities here. I think Greg's right. I definitely think that police unions are a piece of this. The other thing is that I just read something recently that said 90% of the chiefs in the U.S. are white, so that's a problem. But when we had our break, and I talked to my I talked to my son about this question, that why do 99% of the officers' cases end in no charges? He said to me something, and I think that this is a piece of it, but I think we need to dig deeper. He said, um, police officers think they're above the law.
Hmm.
I think that there is some truth to that.
There is.
I mean, at least their actions say that.
Yes.
Secondarily, though, if we're talking about,
Right.
going into a criminal situation where we have a jury trial, you know whose fault that is? That's the fault of the people in the jury box, because they also believe that the police are above the law, that we cannot hold these guys accountable for what they did. And what are you going to do when, first of all, how are you going to find 12 people in Minneapolis that haven't seen this video, and how are you going to find an
Right.
impartial jury? So
Right.
good luck on that.
Right.
I feel bad for the AG in that situation, but again, we need to change the narrative in this country about people with badges and guns.
Yes.
There are a hell of a lot of good cops that I know that we work with. I'm in EMS. We work side by side with the police department. And those are not the people that should be held to a standard, because they're already doing the things that they signed up to do. It's the people like the four clowns that sat there and murdered a man that we need to start dealing with. I think too, systemically, we should be talking about racists within police departments and how do we weed them out.
Yeah.
Again, those are complex things. They're all complexities that it's just not one answer. How come a cop who gets fired from one town can mosey on down the road and get a job in another town, right? Those are problems outside of large police unions. They happen in smaller, in smaller departments, but they still happen. This clown that put a knee on a man and murdered him had 18 complaints over 19 years, and somebody didn't think at some point that maybe we should tap the brake on this guy being in a community
Right.
such as Minneapolis. I mean, their own police chief sued them for systemic racism and won. How does that happen?
Right.
Not go unchecked. Who the hell up there is paying attention to anything? So those are again, it's complex. It's not easy. And somebody had said to me, as I was talking about this with them, that, you should have to, if you're a cop, you should have to live in your community, because if I'm a white cop and I live in white rural America and I drive to a community that's diverse, I don't know how to deal with those people.
That's right.
I'm just saying, again, another problem. Our police officers should mirror the communities that they work within. I'm just saying, that whole issue is complex, and it makes me mad to see a statistic that basically is we're not holding our people accountable at all. And that's sad, because in other professions, in doctors, in emergency medical individuals, lawyers, they all are held accountable, and we have to take that kind of mentality and apply it to our police. And I know that that may not be what people want to hear, but I don't want to see another person murdered at the hands of a cop who's supposed to be taking care of people.
Right. That's right, man. I mean, you hit everything right on the head. This is complex. It's multi-layered. The solutions to end this involve the police, the unions, all kinds of different legislation needs to be passed. All kinds of checks and balances need to be there. Jail time needs to be there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of layers to this. And we just have to keep on fighting on all those levels for all those things. Um, Eventually, I am confident, I am optimistic that it will come to pass because enough is enough. Enough is enough. I do have one last article I wanted to get into, guys. Give me a second while I share my screen again. Okay. Somebody might have to press their mute button. The name of this article is actually taken from Spectrum 13 News website I go to every now and then. Really good article that I found written by George Floyd. It's called Talking to Your Children about the George Floyd protest. Um, Nationwide, the protest for George Floyd, the black man who was killed by a white police officer, can be seen not just TV, but also on social media and the internet. That means children have access to not just news coverage, but also how people share what is happening. A black father had to have a frank talk about Floyd and the protest to his children. Cecil Logan is raising five children, with the youngest is 5 years old, and Logan already teaching them how to interact with police. We teach them whenever you see the police, you encounter the police, is always yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, he said. As communities across the country mourn the death of Floyd, Logan is hoping his sons do not become the next hashtag. They want to know what he did. And I said, well, they said he used a $20 bill. And they said, what was wrong with that? Then my 9-year-old says, it wasn't even worth him dying. Floyd had purchased cigarettes at a convenience store in Minneapolis, and one of the employees accused him of buying with a counterfeit $20 bill. That is how the incident started, that would eventually lead up to his death. Police officer Derek Chauvin placed his knee on the handcuffed Floyd, which resulted in the man's death, according to two autopsy reports now. Logan says he had to have an honest conversation with his children after they pulled up the video of Floyd's death on YouTube. Social media makes it hard to unplug from videos, pictures, and posts of Floyd's death. Therapists say the images can be traumatizing for children. When a child experiences something scary through sight, sound, touch, taste, that nervous system gets activated, and depending on the point of development, you're also wiring for exception about the future, said the therapist. Logan's hoping that his children can live in a world where they are not afraid. As parents, we don't have to be fearful when our children leave out the door. Now, with that article being read, let me go back to the studio. Got a last question for you guys. What are some of the talks you are having with your children or family members or loved ones about the protest and police violence against Black people and people of color? And this time I want to start with Debbie on this one. What are some of the talks you're having with your children or family members?
So I have 5 kids, 4 boys, all white, and then my daughter. Um, and I'm very political. My kids have grown up around politics. They also, have friends that are of color. They all went to protests. My boys fear at any time when they interact with the police stops at potentially being arrested. My boys don't fear ever having to have a gun pulled on them. Um, obviously if they were committing some sort of crime, but
Sure.
but what I'm saying is just in general conversation or general interaction with police officers, my kids don't have to fear that.
Right.
They because their skin is white. you know. And I know DL came out earlier this week and said, you know, the scariest place for a black man is in a white man's imagination. And that is true. You know, so the talks that I have with my kids are ones of, you know, this is wrong. We know why it's wrong. We're going to fight. We're going to, you know, stand up for those who have no voice. And we're going to lead our white community, you know, alongside the black community and say that enough is enough. My daughter, on the other hand, her dad is black. And in where we live, you know, I mean, I don't live in backwater Alabama, but I do live in Sandwich, Illinois. And I can't tell the difference some days. But my daughter, you know, when we sat down and asked Sophia, because we gave her a choice, do you want to go to the protest? And we talked to her about George Floyd, what she's seen, what she's accessed online. And, you know, Bruce and I had a frank conversation with her. And there is, I cannot express anymore the anxiety that I have when that man leaves my sight. And now I know what mothers of all colors who have kids of all colors go through every day when their kids go away from them. And it is a terrifying thing for us all. And we just should not be having those types of conversations with our kids. You know, we should be talking to 9-year-olds about things that involve 9-year-olds, not these, you know, systemic problems in America. And, you know, and it's sad. And I will say that I know that there is this talk that parents and kids that are of color have with their children. And you know what? That's not working anymore.
No, it's not.
I know Jamie Foxx was speaking out at George Floyd's memorial, and at a protest, and he said that too, that, you know, we give our kids the talk. We tell our kids how to interact with police. And that's not working anymore. So now what do we do? Right? You know, that's a huge problem for parents. And I cannot imagine the anxiety and the anguish that being a mother or a father of young men, young black men these days, what they go through. And, you know, it's just terrifying. And that's, no parent should have to go through that.
Right.
None.
I feel you. I feel you. Mona, I want to ask you to ask you the same question. What are some of the talks that you've had with your kids, and with you being an entrepreneur, maybe with some of the clients that you've had about the violence against Black people and people of color? Mona don't hear us. Mona, can you hear us?
So, my kids are grown. My daughter is biracial, and she's going to be, my son, he's 20. So, yeah. Can you hear?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We're fine.
So anyway, so I have been talking to my clients mostly, and what I'm getting is people they notice what is affects them, right? And if it doesn't affect them, attention. So with this video, Floyd really brought a lot of attention, and so now it can't be ignored. And when you have, you know, all the other murders of all the people of color that were unarmed and murdered, and it's all on video and you can see it. I mean, you can't ignore it anymore. So the problem is, and like you said way earlier, Andre, I feel like people are really starting. This is a problem, and the people that feel like they right are joining in, and they are protesting alongside people of all races, ages, getting together and protesting. And it's a wonderful thing. The problem is that the protest turns into looting and destroying property, and that has a lot to do with the way then people view this, because I don't know, like it's like you're in it and you're fighting, and then people come along and just blow it. There needs to be unity. There has to be unity in order to what's wrong, and the people have to come together and they have to stand. And I think the voices are being heard. And from me talking, they're starting to have different views, and and change can be made from that. And I believe it, and I believe that it's in the right direction. But what they don't want to see is people coming out and destroying their communities and stealing from the small business owners. That's a problem, and that's not helping the situation. But when it comes to closed-minded people already who are actually like, oh, this is a problem, like I'm going to go ahead and join this fight. Like, so I feel like you have to, everybody needs to come together. And I'm not going to full protest, because it can't be peaceful, because then it won't be heard. Yeah, I mean, you need to stop track of it if you have to, and people are joining in. That's what needs to happen. I mean, we need to, everybody that stands for what's right and stick together.
I feel you. That's right. That's what we have to do. Absolutely. Greg, same question to you. What are some of the talks that you may be having with your kids or with your loved ones about the protest and police violence against Black people and people of color?
Well, my kids are old enough. My son, he's 18, he'll be 19 in August. My daughter's 14.
Okay.
And we've raised them the same way we were raised. And, I have to say, I'm really proud of my kids. They see people the same way we do, as people, not by a race or a gender or gender preference. They don't see that.
Right.
So we know we've done a really good job. So there's not too much we've had to really talk to them about.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been watching, especially my son, because my son is interested in going into the military, into the Air Force. And, he was just beside himself the other night when they were showing what was going on in Washington, D.C., when they were clearing peaceful protesters out of there with violence and tear gas and rubber bullets, just so that jackass could take a walk and make a complete clown out of himself in front of that church.
Yeah, go hide in the bunkers.
Yeah. But he's seeing, all kids should, we've never sheltered our kids. I grew up in the city. I saw things that God, as a kid, that people in their late teens in the suburbs had never seen, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we felt it was important not to shelter our children either. Just let them see, once they pass a certain age, let them see what the world is like, what they need to prepare for. So, yeah, I have to say, and I told my son how glad I was to see so many different cultures coming out to support this.
Yeah.
Because this has got to end.
Yeah.
And you know what? I mean, I think what everybody's saying is right. This is different. There is something different about this. And it's good for my children to see, because this is history being made.
Yeah. Yeah.
They never, even I wasn't, you know, old enough to remember Martin Luther King and the walk in Selma and stuff like that. I was just too young.
Right.
It's good for them to see this and see how standing up and letting your voice be heard is sometimes what needs to be done. That's why, I'm hoping that so many of these people that are out there protesting will show up at the polls in November.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. With that being said, guys,
Like Greg.
take the time and read some of the comments. We have Peace Fam from Brandy. Robert Alexander says, guilty or innocent. No Americans deserve this violence. Ronaldo Jackson says there will always be deflection for those who don't know more importantly and don't embrace their lineage and history. Um, Ronaldo Jackson also says unions have their back and we had black president, but that was status quo. He showed that with Henry Gates and having the beer, the beer gate thing. I remember that. Ginger says, I believe they think that they are above the law. And she's right. We definitely touched on that. Above the law, these cops, boy. Deb, you got a lot of agreement there. Mona, you as well. Greg, you as well.
You know what? The
Uh,
thing. I mean,
yeah, I'm reading back the comments on here real quick. Ginger says, great discussion.
the cops.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, that's their job, like, is to protect and serve. Like, why they think that makes them like a better person than the person that they're maybe stopping for a traffic stop or whatever.
Right.
I mean, and Deb said earlier, and I agree. Like the cops need to, I think, be from that community,
Yeah.
because that, like I said, I mean, some white people, they've never even had a conversation with anyone of color, and then you bring them into a diverse city, and they don't know how to talk, and they don't. It just escalates quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Despite the training to de-escalate that policemen are supposed to have. You're right. Absolutely right. At this time, folks, I want to invite people to call in. Call in, and if you have a question for one of the guests, if you have something that you wanted to share with us for this discussion, the telephone number to call in is 708-414-0849. That's 708-414-0849. I think this has been a really good discussion, very informative. I think we all agree on the fact that this is multi-layered, very complex, and it's going to take all of us continuing to work towards the reform that's necessary. It really, really is. It's too necessary. It's been long enough. You know, it's been long enough. We're all American citizens here. We're all going to work every day. We're all trying to have a better life for ourselves and our family. We're all trying to better ourselves. So the last thing we need is the police they're gonna pick folks off, and it's just not necessary. I'm with you guys. A lot of some police officers, I think some of them do carry this attitude that they are above the law, and that's because they have gotten away with murder for so long. So yeah, they're gonna feel that way. Judges, unions, they protect them. And that silent code that the boys in blue have with one another is real. And it doesn't matter what color that person is. Once you put on that blue uniform, I'm seeing that, that dedication towards that culture. If it's a negative culture, people adhere to it. It doesn't matter what race you are. You you put on that badge, you doing what the boys in blue want you to do. And so, it's crazy. I don't understand why it happens. Um, call in show for
Oh, your mic got muted.
see that. Oh, okay.
There
Here
you
we go. Here we go. Oh my goodness.
He muted
Wow.
himself.
Yeah,
I
right.
see. I see. Oh my goodness. Okay, everybody, call in.
know.
Well, and the good cops,
Yeah.
they need to speak up when they see
Right.
Yeah, the good cops. You're right about that, and they. I talked to one guy, and he was saying that he's a cop. He was saying that yeah, it's real. They are afraid. Some of them are afraid that they're gonna be be
Right.
retaliated against from other cops. And I'm like, wow, that's a trip, man. I would hate to be in that profession where I'm here to serve the community and save lives, but my life can be threatened by fellow officers. That's a crazy existence to me. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about it, people. Call in 708-414-0849 if you have a question for Deb, Mona, or Greg, or myself, or if you would like to add to the discussion, whether it be your feelings about the protest, feelings about any of the things that we've been talking about tonight. Um,
Hey, Dre,
What's up?
just a comment. I don't know if you even caught this. I know we didn't talk about it, but to touch on what you guys are saying about, cops policing other cops. Did you know that 2 of those guys were day 3 and 4 on the job?
Yeah, they were rookies.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
Say.
Yeah.
rookie.
And their
Yeah,
excuse
so-
was, because he had higher rank, they didn't want to say anything.
That's what they're being taught.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Look at what
that's a
they're
bad
doing.
excuse.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
not working out well.
It's not. This is how
No,
you do your
not at all.
job. You get charged with murder. It's crazy.
Yeah,
I gotta say on the flip side though, it is not an easy job to be a cop. I mean, I've had friends who are cops, and I was an actor, and I mean when I was working on a show that was being filmed here, not Chicago PD, but Chicago Code that came before it. These shows use real cops.
Right.
They're almost all real cops on the show. Background actors, even some of the bit parts, those are real cops. And you listen to these guys talk, and it's like, my God, how could you possibly go home and just decompress after things that they would tell you happened? How could you go home and not have a clear conscience? I don't mean that, but I mean these guys must carry just an unimaginable amount of stress, and when you're walking around like that day after day, week after week, year after year of stress like that, how much it's not going to take much to make you snap either. I mean, not in defense of what happened with George Floyd, but I mean, because I know there's a lot of police bashing going on and stuff like that, and defund the police but they serve an important part of our community, and I mean we need them, but we don't need them like this.
Not like this.
No, they all need to go through some type of, real sensitivity training.
Well, that's a good point, Greg. But the flip side of that too is that these guys are human, and agents, and agencies are not equipped. Yeah. well, agencies are not equipped to give them actual training because the funding's not there.
Right.
Actual training, for situations that are high stress, mass shootings, things like that. Our agencies don't have the funding for that, and now we're calling for defunding the police. So that's interesting. Maybe we can move the money and do something, invest in our
Right.
police officers. I don't have a problem
Right.
with that.
Right.
But that they are human
Right.
and they are under stress, and that's part
Yeah.
of the problem. Again, you're talking
Yeah.
about complexities. That's a huge problem.
Right.
They're and I think that unfortunately, again, we are seeing how massive this situation is, and then how many problems have stemmed from it.
Right.
And part of it is that.
You know,
You know,
Deb said something earlier about, you know, there are elements of white supremacy in police forces and stuff like that, and that's a problem too. Is the fact that this is a job that people like that gravitate to because
for sure.
they can live out their aggressions without any
Right.
ramifications.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There was a
Fly right under the radar.
That's
Right under
right.
the radar.
there was an FBI study that talked about how law enforcement had been infiltrated by white supremacists.
Right.
So yeah, I feel you on that. Um, don't look like we're gonna have any calls tonight during the show, and that's okay. Overall, I felt it was a great show. Very, very informative. I appreciate you guys for joining me today for this discussion. Very important, Greg, Deb, and Mona. Um, Next week we will have a new show for you guys next Thursday, 4 o'clock Central Standard Time. But thanks again for joining us on the Reset podcast for the working class, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.
All right, Dre. Stay safe,
Great.
man.
All right. All right.